I'm going to talk today a little bit about Shakespeare's original practices and what we can learn from it, if we can learn anything from it. So, I have to say, I was really nervous because I was scheduled to go the first night, and I was like, I have no idea what this conference is going to be like. I'm really nervous, and now I'm nervous because I have to follow all these great, presenters. So, it's really been a wonderful conference, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation today. I don't want it really to be a lecture, because there's so much that I don't know about Shakespeare's original practices. I feel like the more I do it, the more I realize there's less I know. Do you know what I mean? So I'm really interested to hear if, people's thoughts on it, sometimes it's a little bit divisive. Some people, you say original practices, and they kind of get bent out of shape and fired up about it, and then other people are like, what is that? What is that? So today we're going to talk about, original practices, and like I said, I really hope that we have a conversation about it. I was thinking about, I think Paula said, tradition and learning the tradition of ballet yesterday, and, I think for me, when I first became an actor or wanted to study acting and study theater, way back in the 90s when I decided to go to the conservatory, I had all these friends that were like, oh, I want to break all the traditions, I want to break the tradition. And I was like, well, what tradition are you breaking? What are we doing? What are you talking about? And I thought, I want to learn the traditions first, and then break them later, right? So I decided I wanted to be a Shakespearean actor. And then a little bit later on, I decided that I wanted to study Commedia dell'Arte. And, the more I learn about those traditions, I haven't really gotten to the point where I'm ready to break those, because I don't feel like I've really learned enough from those traditions. So I'm really kind of I don't have a lot of answers. I have a lot of questions. And hopefully we'll get to some of those answers today, and maybe not, I don't know. But I used to be artistic director of a Shakespeare Company in Maryland, USA, called the Maryland Shakespeare Festival. And I first got involved with them in, I think 2006, 2005, as a fight choreographer, because I also do stage combat. So they hired me as a fight choreographer. And then in 2008, the artistic director, the founding artistic director, wrote me an email, and I wish I saved it, because it was really a beautiful email. I remember thinking, wow, this is really eloquent and really beautiful, but I don't know where it went to. It's somewhere in the ether. And in that email, she asked me if it was called a bold proposal, something like that, a bold proposal. And she never used the word original practices. She just said she wanted to do these experiments with Shakespeare's language, with the rhetorical figures in his language. And would I be interested in doing this? And what it is, and she kind of described the system that she was going to use, and, would I be interested in doing this? And I thought, this is insane. This is crazy. This is never going to work. Shakespeare wasn't that brilliant. He didn't do it all on purpose. It was just an accident, and, blah, blah, blah. It'll never work. I have to do this. I have to see this fail, right? I really expected it not to work. And then the first one we did was Coriolanus, and it worked. And I was like, wow, I have to do more of this. So I just kept on doing it and doing it and doing more of those. But, the common question that I get all the time is, when I say original practices, people say, why do you do that? Right? Why are you doing that? What is the point of original practices? And that's kind of and that's exactly how I feel on the inside whenever I perform doing original practices. What am I doing? The moment before I step on stage, I hate myself for agreeing to do it. Why did I do this to myself? And then as soon as I go on stage and I start acting and interacting, and it just all that frustration goes away. It's just wonderful. So, in preparing for this presentation, I realized everybody has a definition of original practices. What does that mean? Manuel asked me the other day, what do you mean when you say original practices? What is it? So, how many people here have done original practices? Has anybody done a production under original practices?
But what is original?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Right. You have.
I mean, I would say without knowing what is an original, like the most similar thing, or to the idea that we have with classical theater.
Okay, yes. So, you know, that's what some people say, like original practices. You had your hand up too, right? So you've done it?
Well, I've done Greek drama, participated in productions of Greek drama where some original practices were followed.
Okay.
So where there was cross-gender casting. I was in a production where all the roles were played by men. But then I was also in productions where original practices were interpreted not as all the roles being played by men as they were in ancient Greece, but all roles being cross-gender. So, which was a different interpretation of what it would mean to do, original practices.
Yeah.
Where a production where we used masks, where we tried to approximate the kind of long costuming they wore and they wore these high,
The shoes.
high shoes that the historians have said they wore.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. The historians said they would do this.
That's
and
what
did
they
you have your
call it.
hand up?
Yeah, I've done classical ballet.
Okay.
I'm schooled in Bologna, which is style.
Okay.
I would say we practice very much
Yeah.
the original. Yeah.
So Shakespeare's original practices, like what is that? How do we define it, right? So, I guess back when they started to develop the Globe, they were going to rebuild the Globe Theatre in London. A few scholars, they were all debating on the columns, where do the columns go, and where does this go, and where does that go, and then a couple people were like, yeah, but what about the acting? Like, how did they produce the plays? So they did all this research, and they think, there's nothing written like Shakespeare said, this is how we rehearse my plays, this is how I want my plays to be rehearsed. It was all kind of, conjecture. So, because they have documents that have all kinds of detail, except for the word rehearsal. They know how much each actor got paid, they know this guy got X amount of money because he was late to the performance, they did this show on this night and they earned this much money. They have all these details, but they never, maybe once or twice, do they find the word rehearsal. So they think that the actors did not rehearse like we do today. Right? There was no director. The director is a modern invention of the 19th century. There was no acting moments. As my Commedia teacher used to say to us all the time, Stanislavski has not been invented yet. Right? So there was no what is your motivation? What are you doing? Why are you crossing the stage? Why do you want to kill Desdemona? Right? There was none of that kind of stuff happening. There was no lighting designers, right? There was no set designers. There was no costume designers. The actors wore what they wore the day they showed up and maybe threw on a toga over top or wore a crown or, something like that. So original practices, I think, who said it? Approximating what we think, how we think they did it, right? Now, the big argument, I think, in original practices is do we do it with what they had, or do we do it with the way they did it with what we have, right? So the Globe Theatre, back when they first started off, they would, Mark Rylance was really into the history of it, right? So the costume designer researched the fabric and the colors, and the makeup, right? They couldn't use the same. They wanted to do everything exactly the way Shakespeare did it, right? So they couldn't use the same makeup because in Shakespeare's time the makeup was lead-based. So they had to find an alternative to that lead-based white makeup, right? The costumes have no zippers. All the latches are attached. There's no buttons the way we have buttons today. There's no zippers. There's no metal latches. There's no Velcro for quick changes. It's all done the way it was done there. They even recreated musical instruments. They went and figured out how to rebuild musical instruments. so we say like natural lighting in Shakespeare's time. What does that mean? In Shakespeare's time, it was either the sun or candles, right? So the not John Wanamaker, the Sam Wanamaker in London is actually lit by candles. Has anybody seen a show there? You have? What's that like? I would love to see it.
It's an experience.
Yeah.
It's more consuming, I'd say.
More consuming?
You feel more part of it, and I think the globe, we were obviously to episode, can be hit and miss potentially because of that practice that's now changing the new guidance as well. But in the Sam Wanamaker, you do feel more like this is you are being taken somewhere else in that realm of experience.
Right.
Yeah, well, more not immersive as in like we're going to get throwing water over our faces.
Right.
Whack.
Yeah.
But you do feel like you are part of that history.
Yeah, I've seen shows at the Globe, and they do their a couple of productions they'll do in their season where they're like in the clothing and in the way that they do it, and then there's other shows where they have lights and it's a little more modern. And I've seen those where they're in the Elizabethan costumes, right? So, and I would love to see a show that that's lit under candlelight. Would be really cool.
Well, they do the same thing with performances in St Giles in the fields, don't they? With the operettas, they do all of that by candlelight.
Right. Yeah.
St Martin's Lane. That's quite a nice one. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's great. So and like I said, there's a lot that I don't know. So I'm not I'm happy to go off on little tangents to learn new things. So when we said like original practices, does it have to be natural light? Does it have to be original music with original instruments? Or can we play with that idea? One of the things that, I talk about fact versus thought, right? So like doing it with the fabric, with all that stuff is the fact of it, right? Or are we trying to do the spirit of it? Do I want the spirit of original practices, yeah? So my theory is, like, what I personally like to do is the thought of it, right? So when we were at Maryland, we didn't bother with Elizabethan clothing. We didn't bother with, anything like that. We didn't bother with musical instruments that were historical. We actually would take modern songs, modern music, and put the Elizabethan lyrics on top of those, right? So, one of the songs we did when I played Benedict was I used a Leonard Cohen song as, and it was amazing how it fit, right? And people are like, where do I know that song from? Because I'm not using the right lyrics, right? I'm using these Elizabethan lyrics. And that's kind of what Shakespeare would do, right? Like, that's the spirit of Shakespeare. He would take stuff from other people and then put his words on it, right? Like, how many versions of Greensleeves is there, right? There's so many versions of the lyrics of Greensleeves because that's what people would do. They would take it and they would put new lyrics to it, right? So I'm really interested in the spirit of Shakespeare, right? Like, how do we do that and not have it be like historical, right? So what I did was, at Maryland, let me just kind of go back a little bit of history. So this artistic director, Becky Kemper, she wrote a book on rhetoric and using Shakespeare's rhetorical patterns as an acting tool, right? And her theory was that because there was no rehearsal, the actor had to get ideas from somewhere, right? How is the actor going to learn their part? So her theory was that the rhetorical patterns in Shakespeare are going to help the actor make acting choices and make them quickly and make them stick, right? And she created this whole way of acting where you physicalize the rhetorical patterns. And she broke them up into 4 basic parts, and she wanted to see if these things worked, right? So she gathered about 12 American actors and asked us to do this. And Coriolanus was a total mess, right? Our very first one was just a disaster, right? We tried to get them to be 2 hours long, right? The 2 hours traffic of our stage. as they say in Romeo and Juliet, right? So we cut the script down, and we tried to get it to 2 hours. It was probably over 3 hours long, because most of the people didn't, yeah, I know. A 3 hour long Coriolanus, like, just kill me, yes. It's as bad as you think it is. It was as horrible as you think it is. And years later I asked her, like, why did you start with Coriolanus? Like, you could have picked an easier play, a better play. She's like, because I don't care about Coriolanus. Like, if that bombed, it wasn't my favorite Shakespeare play, right? So she was like, let's do one that's not that good to start off with, and we can learn from it, and then move on. So that year, we did them over the course of a weekend. So we would show up on Friday night with our lines memorized, supposedly. That was the goal. That's what was said in the email. Show up with your lines memorized. And then that Friday night, we read through the play together as a company. That took about 2 hours. And then we were pretty much done Friday night's rehearsal, right? We talked a little bit about how the day was going to go on. And then the next day, at 9 o'clock, I think it was, we got together as a group. We did all these like warm-ups and stuff. And then we broke up into different groups. And we had what some people refer to as simultaneous rehearsals, right? So if I'm in a scene, if you and I are in a scene together, I would say, let's go work on our scene. And then somebody else, you two, would go work on your scene, and then I would be like, hold on, I need to do a scene with you. Okay, we're done. Are you done? No, you're still, okay. All right, we have a scene together. Let's run our scene, right? So we would try to do these like simultaneous rehearsals. Then we had a dinner break, but nobody could eat because we were all just so nervous and terrified. And then at 8 o'clock, we had our paying audience that came to the show. Right? Yeah. And so the first night, so we had that Saturday night, and we did the show, and some parts worked. They were like, okay, yeah, that part worked. That part was terrible. Why don't you have your lines memorized? Why don't I have my lines memorized? All of this stuff going on. And then Sunday morning, we got together, we talked about it, we fixed a little bit of the problems, and then we did it again for another paying audience the second time, and then we had a talk back with that audience. And that year we did, the company did 5 shows. I did 3 of those 5. So that year we did Coriolanus, Henry V, Tempest.
Tempest.
Yeah. Yeah, King Lear.
Oh my God.
I know, right? King Lear, and what was the other? I forget the other one, but it was equally as challenging, right? And so when you have a play like Henry V is on stage the entire time. King Lear is on stage the entire time, right? So and Prospero's on stage a lot. So those plays were very hard to do because you didn't have the separation, you didn't have those scenes. We did Measure for Measure, and that was a lot easier because the clowns Measure for Measure. The clowns are always together, and then the tragic characters are always together, right? And then they all come together in Act 5. So, we realized, after a while, that this idea of like reading the play the first night, not a good idea. It wastes too much time. We don't have that time. And everybody knows the play anyway, or even if we don't, neither did Shakespeare's Company, right? Like, imagine getting Romeo and Juliet for the first time, and you're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm Tybalt. This is great. I'm Juliet's cousin. I'm going to be in the play the entire time. And then you're like, oh, I died. Halfway through, right? You don't, sorry if I spoiler alert for anybody. But the actors didn't know how the plays ended, right? So we didn't need to do the play. The other thing that kind of happened as we moved on was the same actors, a core group of actors kept on saying yes to the project. So, out of the 15 actors that would be, that started that first Coriolanus, the next one maybe had, 8 of those 15 did the second one, right? And then maybe 7 of those did the third one. So we started to build a core group of actors that would mainly do these. And then, so you know, in Shakespeare's time, it was a company. It was a company of actors that got together to do the plays. And we realized that we were kind of building that company. So we did 3 seasons like that, where we did, in Maryland, we call them bear bard, B-A-R-E bard. You know, like a naked bard, a bear bard, because we did it in a room. It was very, kind of similar to this. It was more of a square. It had like big doors here, but then it had a second level up there, and it was this oak wood building, so it was kind of like the Sam Wanamaker, I think, based on the pictures I've seen. It was very similar to the American Shakespeare Center, the Blackfriars. Has anybody seen that in Virginia? Has anybody been there? You know, it's very similar to that. It had that Shakespearean feel. The audience was right there with us the whole time, you could see. And we had a prompter. We did have somebody on script that if we didn't know our lines, we would say line, and they would feed us our line, and we would move on, right? So, and then we started building all these ensemble. We realized that we really needed to be an ensemble.